Today we're here in beautiful East Tennessee, and we're talking about the incredibly important topic of workplace safety training and documentation, and that starts right now. Hello everyone, Don Stock here with another Challenge Course Pro Tip powered by the Adventure Guild and brought to you in partnership with Adventure Park Insider, where it's our goal to help you build a better, safer, and more professional Challenge Course program. Now, so far in this workplace safety training series, we've covered creating a culture of safety within your organization, the relevant OSHA standards that apply to your organization, the 5 steps to doing a proper hazard assessment, and safety data sheets. Now, all those videos are combined in a playlist that's linked in the normal places all over here. Now, if you haven't watched those, I really encourage you to check them out because there's a lot of great information. In the video description, you'll also find links to equipment, resources, organizations, or any other thing that I mentioned, as well as the link to get your copy of our workplace safety resource packet that we've developed for this series. Now, in this final video in the series, we'll be looking at A, the necessary training that aerial adventure companies are required to provide for their employees, and B, the documentation that's required for compliance with your overall safety program. So let's jump in. Now, when someone says employee training or staff training in an aerial adventure context, most people immediately think of the process of preparing facilitators or guides to move about their courses safely and to operate according to the approved local operating procedures when they're leading a tour or running a challenge course program. And with some notable exceptions, these concepts are well understood and are handled with purpose and intentionality by most organizations. However, when considered in the greater context of overall workplace safety, it's clear that there are many other areas to address besides just staff training for operations. Now, to list all of the training requirements outlined in OSHA 1910 and 1926 is, of course, beyond the scope of this video. However, there's something called the General Duty Clause that's found in Section 5A1 of the OSHA Act, and it provides some simple, straightforward guidance on what we need to consider when it comes to employee training. It says that an employer must, and I quote, furnish a place of employment which is free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. So this requirement means that we as employers need to, number 1, be aware of those hazards that our employees are subject to. Number 2, we have to clearly communicate those hazards to our employees. And number 3, we need to provide training to our employees as part of a system that mitigates those hazards. So, put succinctly, the General Duty Clause obligates employers to take whatever steps are necessary to reduce employee exposure to hazards, regardless of whether there's a written standard in the OSHA code that addresses that hazard. And of course, we identify the hazards in every area of our business by doing a proper hazard assessment, which we covered in an earlier video. So the answer to the question, what training do I need to provide for my employees to comply with the laws concerning workplace safety, is this. If an employee is required to undertake a task or activity, there's a duty to ensure that they have the proper training and information to do that work safely. Now, this training must cover the hazards associated with this employee's activities and how to mitigate those hazards effectively. Now, this often includes activities that an aerial adventure company that's accustomed to focusing primarily on work at height safety might overlook. For example, do employees operate a vehicle like an ATV, or like this vehicle I'm sitting in, or a van, or something similar? Do they operate machinery like a skid steer or a tractor as part of their job? Do they spray chemicals like herbicides or pesticides on trails or around buildings or structures? Do they use compressed gas such as propane or MAP gas in order to do rope cutting procedures? Or do they use power tools for doing construction or repair work? If so, in each case, employers are required to provide training in 1, the proper way to execute the prescribed work, and 2, the appropriate use of any protective equipment and clothing necessary for the job that they're performing, and number 3, how to recognize and report unsafe conditions, and number 4, what to do in the event of emergency. Now, that's why doing a proper hazard assessment is so important, so that we uncover all the areas where training is necessary for our employees to keep them healthy and to keep them safe. Now, one point worth mentioning is there is no requirement in the OSHA code that any of this training be done by a third party. Meaning, if your employees operate a piece of equipment as part of their work, for example, the law requires that they be properly trained in the safe operation of that piece of equipment. but it does not require that that training be done by an outside entity like a professional training company. It just has to be done properly and it has to be documented. Now, the same thing is true of training in OSHA standards for employees with something like an OSHA 10-hour course. Companies are fully within the law to develop and deliver this training themselves. However, in many instances, it's easier, cheaper, and more effective to use a third-party training organization, especially for things like OSHA 10, OSHA 30, and equipment certifications, which is, of course, the perfect segue into our discussion of documentation. Just like requirements for training, there are employee requirements, also known as laws, that govern documentation, record keeping, and reporting of workplace injuries and fatalities. So the obvious question arises then, what documentation, record keeping, and reporting are required for employers? Some examples that are specifically called out in the OSHA standards include the use of personal protective equipment, hazardous waste operations, forklift training and documentation, process safety management, respiratory protection and care, and permit-required confined spaces, and also things like powered industrial trucks and lockout tags. However, as in the case of training, documentation should not be limited to just the items specifically called out in the standard. When considering what training to document, it's instructive to consider the first two questions that a regulatory inspector is likely to ask should they have to investigate an employee injury or fatality at your workplace. And those questions are, first, was this employee properly trained in the work that they were doing when this incident occurred? And secondly, can I see that documentation? So the moral of the story is, if you do it, document it. Because as they say, if it's not on paper, it's vapor. Now, one of the biggest challenges in the hectic pace of business is staying on top of training schedules, record keeping for that training, and the logistics of keeping records current, especially when all of your employees are regularly at different locations. And that's often the case with something like an aerial adventure construction company. In those circumstances, it can be difficult to maintain up-to-date paper records for employee training that are readily accessible to everyone who could potentially need to access them. Now, thankfully, in the digital age, we have at our disposal some tools to help navigate those challenges. Now, the first step in staying on top of training and documentation requirements is to schedule that necessary training at the beginning of your year. And then I recommend placing it on a cloud-based calendar and ensuring that all relevant team members have access. This will allow you to set reminders for a week or more ahead of the scheduled training so that everyone is alerted and can plan for it. Now, this helps keep urgent but less important things from crowding out this important training. Now, second, you might consider moving away from paper training documentation to a centralized digital cloud-based system. This move alone allows employee training documents to live in a single location and to be available to be updated and viewed from anywhere that there's internet access. Now, many options exist for this purpose, but since a lot of companies already use Google Workplace for email, they already have access to Drive, Forms, and Docs, which are great tools for centralized training documentation. And finally, if your organization is particularly complex, a web-based training and tracking documentation system might be a great option for you. Now, these systems are usually quite robust and allow you to track, schedule, and document training in one single application. They can also link to online training modules, so when it's time for an employee to update training, they can get a notification and link to that training resource. A quick web search will yield a long list of companies that offer these services with various features and various price points. But whether you use a web service or plain old paper in a notebook, being diligent to not only provide the training your employees need, but also to document that training demonstrates due diligence and a continued commitment to a culture of safety within your organization. And ultimately, that's what workplace safety is all about and what regulatory bodies want to see. And with that, we're wrapped up on a workplace safety series. As a reminder, the workplace safety resource packet that we put together to accompany this video series is filled with helpful information to connect you to books, websites, and documents that will be invaluable as you develop your workplace safety process. So go to the URL on the screen above or in the description below to get your very own copy. As always, if you found value in this information, we would appreciate it a great deal if you'd hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and especially let others in the aerial adventure industry know about the resource that is Challenge Course Pro Tips. If you have questions about workplace safety or any other Challenge Course or aerial adventure related topic, please leave them in the comments and we'll get back to you. And to connect with us for professional aerial adventure services, please visit challengecoursepros.com and we'll help you in any way that we can. I hope you have a fantastic day. I'm Don, and I'll see you next time.